Have you ever heard of a war started, fought, and won over oranges? Well, not exactly. But the story behind the War of the Oranges is just as juicy. Buckle up, because we're diving into one of history's most bizarrely named conflicts. The year is 1801. Europe is a chaotic chessboard, and Napoleon Bonaparte is playing everyone like pawns. His grand plan: to cripple his arch-nemesis, Great Britain, by cutting off all their trade with the continent. This strategy was called the Continental System. There was just one stubborn holdout on the Iberian Peninsula: Portugal. Portugal and Britain were old pals, with treaties stretching back centuries. They weren't about to ditch their oldest ally just because Napoleon said so. Napoleon, not one to take no for an answer, turned his attention to Portugal's neighbor, Spain. At this time, Spain was technically an ally of France, but it was a very complicated relationship. The Spanish government was in turmoil, led by a man named Manuel Godoy. Godoy was the real power behind the throne of King Charles IV, and he was ambitious, shrewd, and caught between a rock and a hard place. Napoleon saw an opportunity. He essentially gave Spain an ultimatum. Either you convince Portugal to close its ports to Britain, or we'll do it for you, and we might just stick around. Godoy, wanting to assert Spanish strength and perhaps gain some territory for himself, agreed. He saw this as a chance to prove Spain wasn't just a French puppet. So, Spain, backed by a looming French army, declared war on Portugal in May 1801. This wasn't a war of grand, epic battles. It was more of a swift, decisive campaign. The Spanish army, commanded by Godoy himself, marched into Portugal. The Portuguese forces were unprepared and vastly outnumbered. The Spanish quickly captured several Portuguese towns near the border, including Olivenza, which remains a point of contention between the two countries to this day. The campaign lasted a mere 3 weeks, from May 20th to June 6th. It was so quick and relatively bloodless that it barely registered as a major war in the grand scheme of the Napoleonic conflicts. The Portuguese, seeing the writing on the wall and with the French army ready to pour over the Pyrenees, quickly sued for peace. So, where did the Oranges come in? This is my favorite part of the story. After a successful siege of the Portuguese city of Elvas, Manuel Godoy, wanting to send a token of his victory to the Queen of Spain, Maria Luisa of Parma, with whom he was very close, allegedly plucked some oranges from the trees outside the city walls. He sent these branches to the Queen as a symbol of his triumph. This romantic, almost theatrical gesture gave the conflict its famously fruity name: the War of the Oranges. It wasn't fought asterisk for asterisk oranges, but the fruit became its enduring symbol. The war ended with the Treaty of Badajoz. Portugal agreed to close its ports to British ships, pay a hefty indemnity to France, and formally cede the town of Olivenza to Spain. For Godoy, it was a personal triumph. He was celebrated as a hero in Spain and given the title Prince of the Peace. For Napoleon, it was a tactical win, tightening his economic stranglehold on Britain. But history, as always, has a twist. The peace was fragile. Portugal's compliance was half-hearted at best, and they secretly continued trading with the British. This infuriated Napoleon, leading him to invade Portugal directly a few years later with Spanish help, an event that would ultimately trigger the devastating Peninsular War. This larger conflict would engulf both Spain and Portugal, lead to the downfall of Godoy, and ultimately contribute to Napoleon's own demise. So, the War of the Oranges, a brief 3-week affair named after a romantic gesture, was actually a critical It set the stage 4 years of brutal warfare on the Iberian Peninsula. It's a fascinating example of how even the smallest conflicts, the ones with the silliest names, can have massive, unforeseen consequences that ripple through history. It shows the complex web of alliances, ambitions, and personal relationships that drove the Napoleonic era. From a bouquet of oranges to a continental war, it just goes to show you that history is often stranger and more interesting than fiction. What do you think is the weirdest name for a war you've ever heard of? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this little slice of history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories you might have missed in history class. We'll see you in the next one.